Once you have observed leadership and prepared notes, it is important to plan how you will deliver your observations to the leader. The timing of a discussion on leadership observations can be critical, and a deciding factor between whether feedback is interpreted as evaluative or developmental.
I want to provide the feedback to the soldier that same day, if possible, as close to the training event as possible. That way that soldier, that NCO, or that instructor has the opportunity to correct the deficiency as soon as possible.
I want to make sure I've got that leader's full attention when I'm just trying to convey some of my notes or observations to them. I don't want to necessarily cut their legs out from under them in front of their soldiers. I just want to add to the decisions they made and maybe give them a different perspective.
An important consideration for delivering observations is to create a developmental climate for the interaction. This involves knowing the person you are giving feedback to and tailoring your message appropriately.
Some of the things that I look for when I'm observing a leader and providing feedback is I try to gauge the personality of the leader. I want my observations to be received. What I don't want to do is come at them a certain way and have them essentially shut down and not listen to what I'm saying. So I kind of gauge their personality and try to present my observations to them in a way that is going to stay positive, but yet get them to think about potentially doing it a different way or maybe a better way in the future.
You can't point fingers at people. You have to essentially set the mood. You got to make them comfortable with what you're about to tell them, because every soldier is different, every leader is different, every person is different. So you have to figure out how you're going to motivate that subordinate or that individual differently than you would another subordinate or individual. So I think once you set that mood and you create that setting, you'll get positive feedback from them in lieu of them shutting down and then just going into the yes sergeant, no sergeant, yes first sergeant, no first sergeant mode, which a lot of soldiers will go in if you start pointing fingers at them. That's the worst thing you can do.
Once you've completed the preparatory work and determined the appropriate time and setting for delivering an observation, it's time to engage the subordinate leader. When giving feedback, it is best to start by asking the leader for a self-assessment of the situation before adding your observations.
It is very important for the subordinate leader to provide their own assessment or their own analysis. And the reason for this is because if you just tell that individual what they did wrong, they might not agree, but they might just go ahead and say, yes, I know, and move on without actually buying in. But if you can get that leader to actually say, you know what, I know I messed up on this part and I could improve on this part, and this is how I'm going to do it, then they actually have more buy-in, as they're more willing to do it because it's coming from their own plan and it's something that they agree with because they're the ones that said it.
You dialogue with the soldier and you say, hey, how do you see what you've done? All right, this is what I saw, and that's your end product. It's actually the putting the two together so you actually get a truthful image.
I want them to do a self-assessment. I want them to let me know how they think they did. Say a soldier or an NCO gave a class. First of all, you want them to identify their strengths, their weaknesses during the training session, and then you want to provide them with their feedback.
When adding your observations to the discussion, remember to be specific about behaviors that you observe that the leader should or should not continue demonstrating.
The most important thing when you're providing feedback is to use specific instances from whatever you're giving feedback from. So I think you did a great job. I don't think that's really gonna make them feel any better. Like, oh, okay, they weren't really even paying attention to what I was doing. They're just, going through the motions. If you take something specific and you're really listening to what they're doing, if you take that something specific and then pick something out of it and just say, I really enjoyed when you talked about this piece of your brief of property accountability, maybe assigning a piece of equipment out to a soldier. I think that you really did. You got in there. I think that the soldiers grasped it, stuff like that. So it's more of exact instead of broad strokes.
There are several pitfalls to avoid when delivering an observation to a subordinate leader. Things to avoid include being vague in your message, being abrasive or judgmental, and giving feedback too late after an observation is made.
some of the things that I try to avoid is just glossing over their performance. You know, if it was something that I observed that needed attention, you obviously want to address it, whether it be right or wrong. You just don't want to overlook some mistakes that leaders can make because that can compound down the road into a much larger mistake. I try not to come at some of the leaders too hard or too harsh. I don't want to essentially shut them down. I want them to hear my feedback, process my feedback, and hopefully stay positive at the end of it and get better.
When I'm providing feedback to an instructor or an NCO or a soldier during training, I keep in mind, don't come off abrasive, don't come off judgmental or condescending. Be understanding of the fact that maybe this is their first time teaching a class, or maybe they're new at it, or they're not a subject matter expert. But I think it's really important to not come off as judgmental and not come off abrasive, and deliver your feedback in a constructive and a positive way.
When you wait 3 days or 4 or 5 days, really at that point a lot of times you're going, why are we talking about it now? If this was so important, why didn't we talk about it then? And depending on what activity you're doing, you might have already done the same activity again and made the same mistake because you didn't talk about it and get that feedback to really give them a purpose or direction to not make that same mistake. So really, the longer you wait, the less information you're going to get, and the more chance you're going to miss something, or you're going to repeat your mistake.
When delivering an observation, be mindful of the leader's receptiveness to what you are saying. Remain attuned to verbal and nonverbal cues from the leader, and be prepared to handle defensiveness to your feedback.
A lot of people take feedback in a negative fashion. I used to do that as well. Feedback was, you were telling me I wasn't doing something properly. So many folks automatically slide into a defensive position. And it took me a little while to learn not to do that, because when you take a defensive position, you're hearing but maybe 20% of the conversation.
Some of the things I've done in the past is, hey, this is open and honest, hey, let's talk about it. And when it becomes more of a discussion, people share more and they don't get as offended. And really, no matter what happens, you always try to point out some of the good stuff they've done too. No matter what, you can nitpick and find something bad, and you can always find something good. But I think it's to be clear and really convey that this is to get better. And when you put it out like that and make it more of a dialogue instead of a one-way conversation, you're going to get better results, and people tend not to get as offended or upset.
One way to handle the defensiveness of a leader, if they have done something wrong, is just to reassure them, hey, you didn't really do this to standard, but I don't want you to think that you're a failure. I just want to open your eyes to the right way, or a much better way to accomplish the mission. And I feel like I would be doing them a disservice if I didn't mention that they hadn't done it correctly.
Overcoming defensiveness towards feedback starts with knowing the person you're talking to. If you're leading somebody, you've got to know them. So if they start to become defensive, what I like to do personally is I like to sit them down. I don't make them stand up in front of my desk or anything like that. I make them sit down, and then usually what I'll do is I'll come around from behind my desk and either sit in a chair across from them or sit in a chair next to them, and then I talk to them that way. And that kind of relaxes them a little bit and lets them know that I'm not here to point fingers at them. I'm not directing, saying, hey, you're all jacked up, but something needs to be fixed, and we have an issue that we need to resolve. And I think that goes back to just kind of setting a climate of understanding, I think.